going to give it one more shot with a different advisory team, a different investment banker firm. And this time I'm going to really do my own diligence on who I should work with. And it's tough when you're the size of agency that we were right at that cusp of like, yep, you're interesting, but you're not like super interesting.
She just sold her company. She sat in a room full of men negotiating the biggest deal of her lifetime. Wait, she sold for how much? I can't even believe she managed to get double her valuation. Let's keep this just between us.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of The Exit Whisperer. And boy, oh boy, does my next guest have some secrets to share with you. Talk about kissing a lot of frogs before you find your prince. Christine Slocumb of Clarity Quest Marketing had a healthcare tech marketing services business. So an agency focused on healthcare and technology, really good business. And when she decided she wanted to sell, she had to try 5 different times. Talk about getting like 5 accepted offers of 5 different instances before she actually closed her 5th one and ended up selling to a great PE firm. You're going to hear the story of her exit, but more importantly, you're going to hear about all the things that went wrong and how openly and honestly she talks about that in the journey to finding an exit that was fantastic for her and her company. I can't wait for you to take a listen because it's really, really chock full of stuff. And we explain a lot in this one too. So it's really good, especially if you've like never been through an exit or have no idea about any of it. Take a listen to this one. It's awesome. Christine, welcome to the show.
Hi, Carrie. I'm so excited to be here.
I am so happy to have you here, especially because we met in the world of mergers and acquisitions when we were looking at the company that had acquired me was looking at potentially acquiring you. And so we really met in this world. And so that is super cool for me to have you on today.
We did. We met right in the middle of my world of crazy.
We met in the middle of one of your potential LOIs. And LOIs, for those of you who are listening who don't know what they are, it's a letter of intent. So when someone wants to buy you, they basically give you a letter that says, we want to buy you. Here's how much we want to pay, you know, all of that. And then you go into due diligence to make sure everything's correct. And then theoretically you close. Now, we met when you were in the midst of your LOI era, as we say. Christine, how many LOIs did you actually have offered for your business before you ended up closing with your acquirer?
Yes, and this is not all at once because a lot of lucky companies get a lot of LOIs. Mine were 5 sequential LOIs.
Like 5 people that you thought you were going to go to, and then at the end of the entire long process, right? Because if we say 5 LOIs, people could think like, oh, 5 different groups wanted you. Great. But no, this was you started to try and sell. There's 1 LOI. Nope, didn't work out. Okay, again. And that's 5 times. And I want to tell you how grateful I am for you for coming on today to share that part of your story too, because we need to know that this isn't always like a Cinderella story fairy tale in any capacity.
It is not. It is not. And for me, it was a 3-year journey. And I'm either resilient or stubborn or both, but probably some combination.
Both. For sure. Okay, so let's start out with the company that you built. Before you wanted to sell, you wanted to start. And so talk to me a little bit about the company that you built and grew so successfully.
I started a company back in 2001, and it wasn't really a company. I had began my career as an engineer working for Enterprise. I worked for Motorola, and I kind of fell in love with marketing there because the company didn't have any. And I went for my MBA, and I saw like this is the difference between companies that have marketing and those that don't. So after my MBA, I went and worked for a few startups in Seattle. It was the 1999, 2000 crazy startup time. And that was really enlightening. But what I found there is a lot of startups didn't have agencies they could turn to that understood technology. They couldn't speak fluent tech. They could put together a brand, they could do creative, they could name your product, but oh my goodness, don't have them write a white paper or talk to the media about anything complex. And I was working in complex stuff, like the first predecessor to Google Glass before it was Google Glass, writing to your retina, wearing these things that made you look like a Borg that you could see through. It was really cool stuff. But it was really cutting edge, and you had to deal with engineers all the time and stuff. And agencies just couldn't do that. So I worked for a few of those types of startups, and I'm in my late 20s, and I was hitting the real glass ceiling. I mean, I literally had a board door shut in my face, not a metaphorical board door. A member of the team shut a boardroom door in my face and say, "You're not invited to this thing." And I'm like, "Oh, the CEO wants me here." Right? So I kept running into that and getting passed over for promotions by 50-year-old guys at the time who didn't know what they were doing. And I'm like, I'm going to start an agency or just start consulting actually at that time, right? And work for who I want to work with, because I'd run across companies I really liked. And I said, okay, I'm going to do this and choose who I decide to work with. And I said, and it's funny, I've listened to a few of your guests. They all had this real belief, and you call this belief. I really didn't have this belief. I was like, I think there's a place in the market. And if this doesn't work, I'm going to give it 2 years to consult. If it doesn't work, I can get back and get a job in-house. I have an MBA and an engineering degree, right? So,
don't you think that's true of services businesses in general? Like these people who have these inventions or these concepts and they say, okay, I'm going all in. I have an unwavering belief. For me, when I started my agency, I was like, I want more time for myself. I want more, any of these things. Like it was really, I didn't think about building a behemoth. And I think for so many of us, we're essentially building lifestyle businesses. We don't want the door shut in our face in the boardroom. We want to be able to work on our own terms and have respect and make money. And so that's how the services businesses kind of start,
Absolutely. I think that's the majority of them. And then we come to our belief process through building this and say, oh yeah, this is something now, right? But when you first started, you're like, I have no idea this is going to work or not.
Yes. When did that happen for you? So when did you go from being like, oh, I'm going to consult to being like, okay, this is like an actual thing. This is an agency. I'm going to build this up. When did it go from being like a lifestyle choice to something that ultimately would become a life-changing asset for you?
Boy, I mean, I think it took probably 7 to 8 of the first year. Yeah. Of the first years. Because that first couple of years, I just consulted. I had some 1099s. I moved around the country. My husband was going to medical school, then residency, and I'm moving state to state with him, which was actually a great flexible job to do that with. But then as I started getting people in-house, which was after about 8 years, then I was like, okay, I think there's something. And after about 10 years, I stopped worrying about paying payroll. But it took that long.
I agree with you. It took that long for me too. And I think that's what's so challenging for so many people who are starting is you have to have the patience and the fortitude, right? The intestinal fortitude to say this is going to take a while. Even now, launching something new, it's hard for me, even in a position of comfort, to be like, oh my gosh, this is not going to make money for a while. It's really not going to be a thing for a long, long time. You got to focus on building. And it's tough. Even in the services business, it's tough to get that build. So totally get there. Okay, so it's 10 years. Now, how long are you running the business when you decide that you might want to sell it?
I had been part of a Women Presidents Organization group, and I had a really good advisor there, and she told me, it's going to take 5 years. And I went, no, it won't. And she's like, get evaluation, start thinking about it, start looking around the edges, and I was like, okay, great. And I did that in 2018. And then I really wasn't sure, exactly what I was going to do. And then COVID hit, and I got COVID in the early days, and I got long COVID in March 2020. It was awful, but it was kind of enlightening too, because I was literally sitting there on my laptop going, okay, writing out a spreadsheet saying to my husband, here's who does accounting, here's who does payroll, right? And I'm like, there's way too much on my plate, way too much. This is ridiculous. This is not fair to my people, not fair to me, right? And I said, okay, I got to fix this. So I restructured the company, which actually helped for the sale because it wasn't all about me, right? At that time, there were, I had a number two, I had people who did things great, awesome. And then, but that was a hard year. That was a hard year for everyone. And we were a completely remote company in the healthcare and biotech space. I mean, we are hockey stick growthing it during COVID, right? But it was hard, even though we were fully remote. Stressful for everyone. And I had a broker approach me and she said, do you want to sell? And I'm like, well, let's talk. I really hadn't come up with the timing plan, but this is feeling good because this year has sucked.
Do you feel like you would have put those systems in place if you hadn't have gotten long COVID? Like, do you think you ever would have gotten to a space where you're like, oh, okay, I need to do this? Like, would you have realized that you were doing as much as you were doing?
Yeah, it was hitting me, but I think that was a severe catalyst, right? I think I would have got to it, but it would have taken me a lot longer. Whereas that hitting me, within like 1 quarter, I was like, this has got to change because all my folks were at risk too, right? I'm like, they're counting on me for, their salaries and this and that, right? And I'm like, okay, we're going to change this. So yeah, it certainly was a catalyst.
Okay, so you meet the broker and you're like, okay, let's do this. And now here you are, you're all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. You're like ready to start out on your sales journey. Tell us.
Ready to start in the sales journey. And we go to auction. Yeah, we go to auction like you're familiar with in that process. And in the first, I did like 20, 30 phone calls. And within the first couple of months, we get an all cash offer. And I'm like, okay, interesting. And I really don't know much, at this point. But, to my broker's credit, she's like, this is a 50-50 shot they can get their financing, but it's all cash and you're out in 6 months. And at that point, I was like, that sounds fabulous.
Well, it's also a service or business owner's dream, right? Because most services businesses are reliant on the founder or perceived as being reliant on the founder. And so you're going to need some cash up front and then you do an earn out. So the idea that you could get all cash, taking all the risk off the table for you and getting out the door quickly, that must have been very appealing. And by the way, for our listeners who don't know what an auction process is, basically your broker sends out a blind listing about you. So they don't know it's you. Nobody knows who you are, but we have this great healthcare tech services business and this is their revenue and this is their EBITDA and this is why they're great. And then people respond and then they potentially want to meet you. And those are the 20 to 30 first meetings that Christine did and then receives this all cash offer. So what happens with the all cash?
So we go through their due diligence wasn't a full Q of E. I didn't know it at the time, but it was still a lot of process through that, a lot of documents, a lot of legal. We get within a week of their bank giving the letter, and their bank had given them an initial letter saying go. The CEO of the bank reviews the loan and says, no way. And, and I'm out, right? And they're out, I'm out, deal's off.
Okay. LOI 1, signed. Don't get the financing. Take me to LOI 2.
Okay, now I'm with private equity because I'm like, I'm not going the crazy like initial founders. Like, let's make this real. Let's do private equity, good private equity company local to me. Now, it is still 2021, and I can't meet people in person. And I would really caution your listeners to ever do that. If you can't sit across and look in their eyeballs, don't do a deal because that's what I learned in LOI number 2. Did the full Q of E through legal, through accounting.
Tell the
Yep.
our listeners, just in case they don't know, Q of E.
Sure. A Q of E is a quality of earnings, and it's a very intense process of looking at every single financial document. In parallel, you're doing a legal review, like think of every NDA you ever signed, every contract you've ever signed.
What you hear about due diligence and times it by 5. And that's quality of earnings. Like, it's really looking at every deal you've ever done in your life and the whole thing. It's nuts. And so private equity often requires that. You're going through this process. What happens with private equity?
So I go through the process. It's usually about a 12-week process. We get to week 11, have the final meet and greet. I had met the platform company. Now, we're a size of agency where we need a platform. We're too small to be on our own. We're interesting to private equity, but we're too small to be the lead in it. So we're always looking at getting attached to what are called platform companies. Larger companies like yours was. We get to week 11. We have the meet and greet. It's over Zoom. And I mean, it was oil and water. It was not a good meeting, right? And they're pulling out things at the end like, why is your company only X? And I'm like, we've been through quality of earnings. You knew the numbers all along, right? And it got misogynistic. It got bad. And so, it wasn't tanked at that meeting, but I kind of said some things and they said some things. And
you just knew.
we're week 11. And I'm like, and the broker's like, this never happens. They've spent like $150,000 in Q of E.
Right, because a Q of E is expensive. So they're not going to do that unless they're ready to close usually. So that must have gone really south. Okay, so this falls through. Deal number 3.
So LOI number 3, this is the one where we signed an LOI too early in the dating phase before the buyer was truly ready. Now, the painful part of all this process is you're mounting legal bills through all of this, right? Because you're having a lawyer review every letter of intent, you're having a lawyer review every piece of the process. I'm like $50,000 in legal bills at this point, right? On LOI 3. So that one didn't take too long and didn't cost me much, but it cost me time.
It cost you time and mental energy. So
Yes.
Fuck you. That one, so I know a little bit more about that one. And I think it was what I would call is like, it's almost like they put a ring on it to get engaged before you dated enough to know. And then they suddenly just, without even talking to you, sort of decided it was a no. And so I call that like your dating LOI. Like they should not have done an LOI. They should have continued to just have a conversation and see if it made sense for them strategically.
Absolutely, because it's putting the seller in an exclusivity position where you're in a quiet period and can't talk to anyone else. So I'd really recommend, and if I were to do it again, is to not sign an LOI until you're further down in that conversation. But literally, like I was like, oh my God, I've been burned twice. I'm like so sick of this. Let's just get something done. If I actually had taken that deal, I would have left so much money on the table. So it was good. I say my dad in heaven was looking down, and everything does happen for a reason. But when you're in the midst of it, you're like, this is the most awful. I was like, after that one, I was like, I am so done. No, I'll be the bank forever. I'll just, be the chairman of the board, give it to my employees. I don't care. I took a year off. I was just like, I'm done. I cannot do it.
I'm exhausted from these 3 LOIs. Tell me about LOI number 4.
So LOI number 4 is a year later. Okay. The great part of it is I'm continuing. Yeah, I needed a break. I needed a mental break. I needed an emotional break. I'm just like, I'm done with this whole thing. I don't think, I can sell the company. I got to keep growing it. So the great part is it's during COVID. I'm in healthcare marketing. We're growing. EBIT is going up. Our earnings are going up. Our revenue is going up. Fabulous. So kept growing. And then I got to the point and I said, I'm going to give it one more shot with a different advisory team, a different investment banker firm. And this time I'm going to not go with the first one, but really do my own diligence on who I should work with. And it's tough when you're the size of agency that we were right at that cusp of like, yep, you're interesting, but you're not like super interesting.
Okay, wait, this is really important. So the first 3 LOIs was with one advisor.
Correct.
One date. Okay. So then you decide a year late, you take the break, you go back in, you're going with a different advisor. We're not yet at the point where we have the successful LOI, but I guess my question for you is, what should people avoid when looking for an advisor that doesn't work? Like what made the best advisor relationship for you? Do you have any advice in picking an advisor?
Yes. There's a lot of trade-offs too that you have to look at. Some advisors are going to charge you upfront money. And that to me just didn't feel good. I've been through 3 fails, right? And I'm like, do I want to pay another $50,000 upfront with no guarantee that this is going to work? And some advisors are going to take a percentage of your transaction either at close or through the entire relationship that you'd have in the sale, right. Whether it's, just money at close or money in earnout or equity or whatever that is, right? So it's individual, I think, but I'd say talk to at least 5 and make sure they've worked with companies your size in your space and understand your specific vertical too. It was really important that I found folks that understood healthcare for me because it's so weird compared to other, like say a consumer product. It's so different.
Yeah. I feel like I didn't do that. And I feel like I got lucky with the deal that I had because I had an advisor. We clicked, it worked, it was good. But like now when I talk to people, I want everyone to talk to multiple advisors, really understand picking your advisor is very, very important, especially those of us who were smaller, sub $10 million companies or, folks that were smaller in revenue. Like investment banks are too expensive for you and they're not going to give you the time of day. And so you need to find an advisor that's really gets you. And I think it's so important. Okay, so you get this new advisor. What happens with deal 4?
Get the new advisor. They don't do an auction, which I loved. That was a model that they had too, which I didn't like the auction because in an auction, for your listeners to do, yes, you're kind of anonymous until they sign an NDA and then they figure out who you are. And so if your competitors ask for that information and sign the NDA, they're going to know who you are. Yeah, this advisory firm said, we're not going to auction you. We don't like that model. We're going to use our relationships, get you fewer interviews, but the ones that you have are going to be really high quality. And I like that. I like that approach. It just felt more like my business too, and being a services-based business. The next set of 20 interviews, get under LOI with one where the guys were really nice. We hit it off. It was also private equity, but it was one of those ancillary, they're not healthcare, but they're a highly regulated business too. And I was like, well, it's kind of, and I'm trying to make put the square peg in the round hole, but in my gut, I'm like, no. And that one, again, was LOI before the buyer was ready to really get married. But they only took 2 weeks of my time. So, again, but mentally...
why do these buyers sign these LOIs? And I guess it does... Were you more hesitant to sign this LOI or no, because you felt like the offer was good and you didn't know them that well yet? Were you more hesitant because of the last dating sale you did?
No, it was a good offer. It was, we had grown, so it was better than where I had started. So and my advisors had done a deal previously just months ago with them. So I was like, okay, they seem like good guys. They're honest. Luckily, they were more honest about things. They didn't tie me up for months. They tied me up for a week or two, and it didn't cost me much other than the mental energy, which at this point I'm going, okay, advisors, yeah, you got one more shot. I was literally like, you have one more shot at this, and then I am out of this.
Okay. Quickie. So deal number 4 was the quickie. It's in and out. All right, we are the buy. Now, yes. Deal number 5. We're finally here. Tell me how this happens.
Before deal 5, I had actually spoken to a private equity firm, Trinity Hart Partners, in Dallas. And it was one of the most professional interviews that I had. They understood it. They understood healthcare. They had done diligence on my business. They asked great questions, not stupid questions. I really, really loved, but I didn't hear from, and that often happens. You'll have these interviews and timing isn't right, or, they haven't acquired the right companies yet. It's all a matter of timing in this biz. Well, right after the deal number 4 goes south, I'm like, can you talk to that guy? I really liked him. I went to my advisor. I really, really liked him. Can you just place one more phone call?
That P guy through this advisor?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I met through the same advisors. And they're like, yep, we just acquired the platform. We want to talk again. And I'm like, yes.
You proactively knew who you should go to. That's very interesting.
I did. Okay. I did. And I could tell, we just hit it off. I could tell they were good guys. They were one of these, Forbes and best, PE firms for owners and owner friendly, and won all these awards. And you could tell just by their website and how they handled themselves, they were extremely ethical. And at this point, I'm not thinking much of PE, but I'm like, okay, these guys seem really, really ethical. And my advisors knew them from personal relationships. And I said, and they're like, they're good. And I'm like, okay.
Not thinking much of anyone. It was your fifth. Right. So at what point do you know that this is going to close? How far into it are you? Do you have PTSD? Are you the day before? Are you this is never going to happen?
Oh yeah. I had such low expectations. The great part is I have this awesome data room. You have to build a big data room with all your information in it for like 5 years in there. The great part is I had that from the past and I kept updating it every month. So I didn't have to do it from scratch again. But I was like, I am at this point, and I will tell your listeners this, and like at this point I had told my main people in there, whereas the first like 3 I had not. And that was so stressful to me because I was like, I'm a transparent person. I tell them everything, and keeping that away from them was just not right for me.
You did. Thank God you did, because the roller coaster of the up and down is so hard for an employee. If something doesn't close, if it doesn't, so it's good that you didn't. But okay, so at this point, your employees.
It's good I didn't, but at this one, I felt like, okay, I can tell the main folks this, the senior level, because this PE company knew I only wanted to stay for a couple of years, maybe 2-3 years, and they wanted to know the next level down. And I'm like, okay, great, that's fair. I told them until the day the money crosses the wire, it's like 50-50.
Yeah, I felt correct too. I felt that too. Even though I didn't have the same experience that you had, it still just doesn't feel real until it's there. And by the way, you were happy with this valuation. You felt really good about the deal. Yeah.
It was so fabulous. I mean, and to this day, I'm still within the holding company, running sales. For that whole company. I am so lucky. Like, I am so lucky those 4 didn't work out.
Yeah. I mean, you're there. Correct me if I'm wrong, and I can edit this out if you'd like, but you're there because you want to be, right? Not because you have to be. Like, you're actually choosing to be there. It's fabulous.
Yep. I have nothing holding me there other than my loyalty and passion and belief in what we're doing, and really like the people. Really like the people.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So now you have this sweet, happy ending. You had a good financial exit. You're here. What's other than telling all of my listeners every nuance of everything that they need to look at when they're going through this LOI process? What else are you up to?
Yeah, well, the one thing that kept me sane through the sell process was I was writing a book in the midst of all of that. And people would say, well, that sounds stressful. But I was like, it was really nice to like put the other stuff away and do something creative. And so I wrote this book called Stop Starvation Marketing. That is a look at, how we really succeeded for specific companies using what we call the Tower of Power model. So that book hit me sane through this whole process. Writing that book, dealing with an editor that was just a gem. I loved it. Loved every aspect. So I'm doing a lot of that, doing a lot of the promotion of that, along with using it as an asset to grow sales for our agency. So that's part of it. And then I'm really, really loving what you're doing, Carrie, in terms of, helping women, mentoring women. Men and women need, we don't know if you're an agency owner, a product owner, you don't know what you're getting into until you're in the midst of this. It was such a learning experience.
Yeah, it really, really is a learning experience. And men and women both need help. I'm just really I'm focused on closing that exit gap, but we all need help. We all do. And I so appreciate one of the ways to help. One of the easiest ways to help is to be honest about what our experiences are like during this process. And you have shared so beautifully a tale that a lot of people don't, which is that you kiss a lot of frogs before you end up getting sometimes to the ultimate suitor. Okay, I have one more question for you, Christine. When you closed and when you got the money, has anything in your life changed because of that, or did you basically maintain the same way? Did you change anything about your life once you were able to extract the value of the business?
No, I say the money, and my husband and I often talk about it, like the money makes you more comfortable, but not more happy.
I totally, totally agree. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. You are a treasure. Thank you, Carrie.
You are too.